Hi, buddy. So exciting, huh? We're gonna sew. Oh! We're just causing chaos today. Oh, good job. This might just be the chaos that we're living in today. So, if a light comes on and off during the whole intro of this video, sorry, but also this is how we live, and it's so fun. So, welcome back. My name is Addie, and you are here at Well Loved Clothing, where we also have a toddler running around everywhere. So you might hear Shepherd in the background. He's very loud and wild today, per usual, so get ready for it. But I have this giant pile of clothing that, if you watched my video from 2 weeks ago where I did my closet clean out, I pulled a lot of pieces that were like alterations and fixing holes and some thrift flip things that are like easy updates to clothing. And so today we are finally tackling this pile that I have just added to for the past 2 years. A lot of this stuff is like, I want to re-dye it, I need to hem it, there's a hole in it, I want to turn a dress into a skirt, those kinds of things. I've also said this before, and I'll say it again, a thrift flip does not have to be some like crazy drastic change of one piece of clothing to another. It's just something that you thrifted, that you're flipping, sewing, changing, adding to it to make it more wearable and keeping your closet sustainable. And this is one of the best ways to keep your closet sustainable, because by updating or fixing something that you already have, you're one, not attributing to like landfill clothing, and you're also not attributing to capitalist structures or inputting demand into the whole clothing system. So it's so sustainable and so much fun to wear things that you already really love, because if it has a hole in it, in my case, that means I have worn the heck out of it. Or if it's missing a button, same kind of idea. So let's just get into fixing up some of this pile. I don't know if this is the one that I'm most excited about, but it's up there. It is this really cute marigold kind of colored mustardy dress. This is just a dress that's from Old Navy, and I've had this dress probably less than a year, but right around that amount of time, and I have worn it a ton, but I find myself every time I wear it thinking this is just a little too short, I don't love the length on me. And so I've wanted to figure out a way to like make it longer, and I didn't know if maybe I would find some mustard linen or something like that. So about a month ago, I popped in for like a quick 30-minute thrift, and I found the exact same dress. So this is just perfect because I can use this same fabric for the bottom of this dress, and I think I'm going to double it and make just like a little layer at the bottom that I think will look so cute on this dress. Yeah, we're excited about it. I'm not sure what I'll do with the top of this dress, but I will keep it for future fabric and stuff too. So let's just get into this project.
We are kicking this thrift flip off by trying on the dress because I need to see how long I actually want this bottom tier to be. I usually like my dresses to hit kind of where that top rust piece is on the sock, but I want to make sure I'm adding an extra inch or maybe 2 for the seam allowance and just some extra hemming space. I think I want about 7 inches long, which means that I'm going to try for 10 inches long, but I also need to make sure that I have enough height on this bottom tier of the second dress and make sure that I'll have enough fabric to gather that bottom tier to make it look full enough. And we're going to take it to some graphics because these always help me understand what's going on. So if this is our first dress, I am measuring the circumference around the bottom, which is 98 inches around. With that measurement, I know if I want the amount of fabric doubled for my base gather, it needs to be 196 inches around the top of that bottom tier. Moving on to dress number 2, I need to take the measurements of the circumference and the height of the base of that dress, which the base is 24 inches tall and 68 inches around. The original dress is a small and this one's an extra small, so that's why the circumferences are different. If I were to cut the bottom tier of the second dress in half, I would get 2 panels of 12 inches and 68 inches around. So the final measurements for the bottom tier that I can make is 12 inches tall and 136 inches in circumference, which I think will end up really perfect. Now that we took the time to figure out what measurements we need, we're going to cut the bottom tier of this dress. I know that I have the space for 12 inches tall, but I really don't think I'll need more than 10, especially because I want the bottom tier to be 7 inches. So in order to not waste some extra on the bottom, I'm going to measure out 10 inches tall and cut directly across the whole circumference of the skirt. And this doesn't have to be exact because I'm going to hem it. So I'm just using my little folding technique here to keep it in somewhat of the same size. And then I'm using that original piece that I just cut to measure another 10 inches up and cutting around the circumference of that skirt again. And then we are left with 2 10 by 68 inch panels, and I'm going to cut the little side seam of this one so I can connect them to make the gather. Once those are cut, I am laying them face to face so I can connect them to each other to create our little tube for that bottom tier. So I'm laying them face to face, and then I am pinning down the left and right side of this fabric and taking it to my sewing machine and doing a straight stitch down that side and then zigzagging it closed to keep it kind of like a serged edge. And once those seams are done, I'm using my fancy schmancy ironing board, which is just a towel, and my iron to flatten out those seams so I can actually gather the fabric and it'll lay well. Next step is the fun part where we get to gather and connect this bottom tier. So to start this off, I am measuring and marking the center of where the front of my fabric is and the center of the back piece and my 2 side seams, making sure that they're all separated evenly throughout the bottom of the skirt. So now I am doing my double stitches that will actually gather this fabric. So before I start, I tie a knot in my thread. That makes sure when I am gathering it later that it doesn't pull through the fabric. And I am doing 1 long stitch from pin to pin. Also make sure that your stitch length is pretty high. My machine goes up to a 4, and so I am always on a 4 when I'm doing these kind of gathers. And at every pin, I restart another stitch, so I'm going to have 4 of these long stitches around the top of my fabric, about 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the fabric. I'm then going to do a second stitch that is also 1/4 inch from that stitch with the same length, tying the knots before every time that I stitch to create these 2 gathering stitches. Now that we have those stitches around the whole top of the fabric, I am going to cut off the hem of my first dress because that's where we're going to attach this gather. Once that's all cut off, I am then marking my center of my front piece, the center of my back piece, and my 2 side seams, and put my dress inside of the gathered piece with them face to face, and put those marked pins with the 2 side seams and the 2 center front and back seams, and pin those together so I have equal quarters of my skirt pinned out so the gather is nice and even throughout. So we can now start our gather and get this dress coming together. So I am grabbing the 2 ends of my thread that I did not knot before sewing them, and I am going to pull both of those evenly at the same time. So I am just tugging and scooching that gather all the way around until it looks like I want it to, and I have it evenly laid out between the 2 pins for my quarter section of this skirt. Once I have it laid out the way that I like it, I am going to pin just about every inch to hold those ruffles in place and pin it to the front of this dress. Repeat that same process for every quarter of the skirt that we pinned off earlier, and then I'm taking it to my sewing machine and sewing between those 2 stitches that we gathered. Once that seam is done, I'm cutting off any excess from that seam and zigzag stitching to finish that edge. Then tossing it on, and I'm already loving the drama, but we need to see how long I actually want to make it so I can do the final step of hemming. So I decide on a couple inches shorter than it is right now. I'm cutting off the excess edge, and then I'm just doing a double folded hem. So I'm folding up about 1/2 inch and ironing that flat, and then doing 1 inch and ironing that flat, and then stitching that down to complete the hem of this dress, which means this dress is done.
So good. This was such a good place to start because it's really making me feel like, oh my gosh, I need to fix everything in my closet. I need to do all the changes because it's just really inspiring when something works out so well. And I really feel like this is exactly what this dress was more meant to be. I love the way that really long maxi length dresses fit on me, and I think it adds so much drama and takes this dress from like a more casual place to this like dramatic, really romantic, just beautiful place with such an easy addition of this bottom gathered layer, because it really doesn't look like an addition. It looks like it was always meant to be there, and I really feel like it was definitely meant to be there for my closet. So let's keep going. This is so fun. I need to get into a routine of doing this because I just thrifted this top in last week's video, so I've had it for like 2 weeks now, maybe a little longer, and I have wanted to wear it so bad, but it has that little rip in it, so we're gonna fix that rip, especially since we're getting into kind of springtime. This will be a perfect springy shirt, especially to stretch over bump situation that we got here. So it just has this little hole right here in the neckline, and it is in the front of the neckline. So I am just going to do some kind of little, I think it's a whip stitch is what it's called, but I probably need to go get some thread for this and some other projects. We are going to check my stash, maybe run to the store, and then do a quick fix on this hole. Let's do it.
Okay, so I haven't done a ton of hole mending before, but this one feels really easy based off of where the stitches are and the shape of it right on the neckline. So I went to the craft store and I got some green thread while I was there, and then I'm going to be using a hand sewing needle, and I just have this little kit of a bunch of different size needles, but I'm going to use a shorter one because I don't have a ton of space to work with. So once I have my needle size, I am threading that and then pulling about 18 inches of thread through the needle. I find that if I hand sew with any more than like 18 inches to 2 feet of thread, it just starts to knot itself up and make the job harder. So 18 inches, and then I'm tying a little double knot on the end to make sure it doesn't pull through the fabric. I can then start my mending. So I'm starting from the inside of this sweater, but I want to keep the outside of it facing the outside so I can actually see what it looks like as I'm doing it. One thing that made this project pretty easy too, since I'm not an amazing mender or don't have tons of experience, was that the stitch pattern was like this, and so it was pretty easy to just follow the vertical kind of stitch. So for my visual girls, I'll show you how this stitch worked. I would poke my needle from the back through the bottom sweater piece and then up over to the top of one of the vertical edges of the neckline seam, poke that through, and then continue that process, going past the opening through the base of the sweater and up vertically to the top of the neckline seam. That's pretty much the same process the entire time. So we're gonna do just a little time lapse of how this went because it's really satisfying to watch this gap close. So let's watch. I really am impressed with how similar this looks, and with doing this vertical stitch, it doesn't affect any of the stretch that this neckline will have, so it'll still be able to go over my head and stuff. Here I'm just showing you where the torn section was before we mended it, and it's really just not noticeable. Something I did notice though are a couple other picks in the neckline, so I'm just going to do some quick mending on those with a similar kind of idea, but since they're smaller, I'm just going to pull some of the threads in. And what I mean by that is that if this is what it should look like, this is how the threads were actually sitting on the fabric. And so I poked my needle through the front of the fabric and then put it through the loops of the knit all the way across that edge, poked it back through the fabric and pulled it taut so that it straightened it back out to where it was supposed to go. I then secured a few more stitches to make sure that that stayed in place and looked clean, and did the exact same thing to the other two little patches that I needed to do, and this top is done.
I just love this top. I love a tank top turtleneck kind of piece. They're so fun for layering and add so much to an outfit. And this color is, I feel like, kind of rare to find. And I'm just loving this color right now, especially for spring and summer kind of feels. It looks so cute with just the jeans. So I'm so glad that we mended this because I will get a ton of wear out of this. And now that it is mended, it lays the way that it was originally intended to. And so the collar, or the like turtleneck part, actually lays right over that seam. So even if this was like a wonky mending job, which I think I can confidently say it wasn't, I'm very proud of this mending job, it would be covered because it's laying correctly, and I love the way that this lays now, and it's just so fun to mend these things and wear what we love. So let's keep doing it. I had a little guacamole break and I got stuff all over me. Well, Shepherd got it all over me, but I am a messy eater, so it could be me. But next up is this gorgeous blue, kind of stone blue gray dress with this amazing tiered bottom and this very like peasant-y kind of style top. You good? You okay? Yeah. Oh, yeah, you'd be speeding steady. I love every bit of this except really the neckline and the sleeves. The back ties are beautiful. The skirt is just gorgeous, and I will wear this so much more as just a skirt. I am going to keep the top because I think eventually I might turn it into something, but for right now we're just going to do the quick fix of turning the dress into a skirt. I've never actually done this before of dress to skirt, but I think this is the perfect one for it, and I'm so excited to have this as just a really flowy, perfect skirt for maternity and summer and everything in between. So let's turn this dress into a skirt.
First things first, I want to remove the top part of this dress from the skirt waistband. And since there is that really great waistband on the front of this dress, I want to keep that as intact as possible because I haven't really decided how I'm going to do this waistband yet. And so I'm using my seam ripper and just separating all the seams at the top of the waistband from the bottom of the front of the bodice of this dress. And here you can see a cute little cameo of my chubby little man's legs. Once I had the front piece separated, I then am just going to cut the back piece. There's no defined waistband on the back of this dress, and so I just want to cut the same amount of fabric from the back as I have on the front, which was about 2.5 inches. So I am measuring up 2.5 inches and then just cutting a straight line across the back of this bodice. It is a split back, so I just want to make sure those two halves are even. So starting with our front waistband piece, I want to fold this piece of waistband in half, but just a little more than half so it covers that bottom seam from the front of the fabric. So I'm using my iron to make sure I get a nice crisp seam, and I'm ironing down about 1.25 inches of fabric. Since I will be stitching the ditch from the front of this skirt, I am going to pin on the front side, but I want to make sure that my pin is catching the base of that waistband on the back. But I also want to make sure that I have at least 3/4 inches of space for the backside pocket, and that has to match on the front. So I am pinning across the front of this waistband and then copying the same process on the back waistband. But take note that I did zigzag stitch the outer edge of what will be the inside edge of this waistband so that it has a nice finishing touch to it. If I had a little extra fabric, I probably would have rolled it and made it a nicer finish, but I didn't have quite enough fabric to fit the elastic, so we just zigzag stitched the edge. So I'm repeating that same process of folding over about 1.25 inches and ironing that fold to keep it in place, and then pinning from the front side of the fabric. And then once I have all of that pinned, I'm taking it to my sewing machine and doing a straight stitch in the ditch. So you can see here what that looks like. It's just stitching along the seam fold that's already there from the waistband and the gathered skirt. So now to do the elastic on the back of this waistband, since I have my little pocket for it. So I'm measuring the same length of elastic that was already on this dress because it fit really well already. I just wanted to change it out to a more substantial piece of elastic. So here we have that length of elastic. It's going to go just across the back of this skirt. The elastic under just the back will gather the way that this is kind of meant to lay as it was with the dress. So I am putting a safety pin through one side of my elastic and then pulling it through that pocket that we created on the back of the skirt. And then once it comes out either side, I am just going to pin it to either side because I am going to sew this all together with the side ties to finish out this skirt. So to do that, I'm sandwiching the side tie in between the front and back waistbands of this skirt, with the elastic also sandwiched in between the two layers of my back waistband. And once this is all stitched up and I zigzag stitch those edges to keep them in place and nice and clean, this skirt is done.
I cannot express how excited I am that this is now a skirt, and the most beautiful, flowy, comfy skirt I have ever put on my body. I will be wearing this skirt all the time. It's really comfy, and I can pull it up like a little higher to have more bump comfort too, because I did make the waistband smaller than like pregnant bump size because I don't need it that way all the time, so I can keep it for a long time. I also left the pockets intact in the skirt, but I'm very impressed with just how finished this looks. It really looks like it was meant to be this way, especially with the little tie on the back of this skirt. I feel like that's a fun detail you don't usually see on skirts. Adds to the kind of romance and the prairie feel of this. And this is also exactly the way I wanted to wear it. I love a little crop top and a really flowy skirt in the summer, so this is going to be like a staple piece for me. Another fix that I think is super important to know, especially because I wear my clothes just really hard, so a lot of times they get holes, but especially my knitwear, I love a big flowy piece of knitwear, and so I feel like it snags a lot and gets holes in it easily. But this is one of my favorite sweaters. I have had this since high school. I've had it for so long, and I just love it. It's flowy and comfy. It's perfect for any season, and the creamy color goes with everything that I have. Fell off, ripped, whatever, but right now there is a big old gaping hole, 2 gaping holes actually, on the back of this sweater, and I actually put it in a pile of things to get rid of or things to give to someone who would know how to fix it, but I just can't get rid of it because I love it so much. What you doing? You want more crackers? You want up? Okay, that makes sense. You're cute. You're cutie. I do think I might just sew it. Apparently Shepherd wants in on it. So I think I'm just going to sew the whole shut, maybe match the sewing on the other side to where it makes sense from the back. Let's see if he'll give it back to us from playing and fix the holes on this sweater.
I started with this thrift flip by laying this sweater flat and just kind of assessing where the holes were and where I might want to pin them closed. And so I just like to play around with these to see what's best. I could like knit or crochet this or do some kind of mending for it, but I think I'm just going to cover up the hole since it's so large and there's a lot of room to work with. But as I was pinning this and messing with it, I had an idea to embroider it. So I started kind of thinking about what I would want this to look like in the end. And this is the sort of idea that I came up with to mainly cover the holes, but then put kind of a design over the top of it. So I was going to just use a little kit that one of my friends gave me with these beautiful colors and use that canvasy piece as the backing for this sweater with the embroidery hoop and needle provided. And I did actually cover the whole first hole and then started to do the second hole and start with the design. And it just became way too time consuming. And I wanted this to be a quick kind of easy project. So embroidery is not for me on knit right now. Maybe in the future we'll try it, but we pivoted back to the original idea of sewing it closed. So I'm laying the sweater out as flat as possible, and then I'm grabbing essentially where the hole is and just picking it up to make that hole the center point of what's going to be my seam. So once I have that, I'm going to pin it and basically make a dart, but I want to start at the very top of the shoulder so it looks more natural coming from the seam. So starting there, I'm angling out and then covering about an inch of space where the rip is. I want to give it about a 1/4 inch of some seam allowance in there so the rip doesn't pull even further and further mess up the sweater when I sew it. But I'm also going to leave the space open at the bottom of this rip and not like dart it back down around because I think it'll give it a nice drape. So my stitch ends up being an inch wide at the fattest part around the hole, and I'm going to copy that exact same shape in the exact same spot on the other side of the sweater so it's symmetrical. So I figured out that it's on the outside edge of this center shape. So I'm picking that up the same way I did if there was a hole in it, and then measuring out an inch and starting at the top shoulder seam, pinning down and leaving the bottom open. I then tried it on with the pins in it just to make sure that it would lay correctly and look how I wanted it to, and I'm actually really excited how this is going to turn out. So I'm taking it to my machine and just doing a straight stitch down the sweater. Once both darts are sewn, I am then zigzag stitching the open edge of the sweater that's now on the inside of that seam to make sure that it doesn't pull apart anymore. And with that, the sweater is done.
So this sweater is my favorite sweater ever, and I am so happy that it's fixed because I've already worn it 3 or 4 times and gotten what I think is ice cream on it, so I will have to wash it before I put it back in my rotation. But I think that this flip turned out so good. I'm really impressed with how easy it was to just kind of make those little darts on the back of this sweater, and I will definitely be watching more videos and trying to figure out how to embroider before I ever try to embroider on sweater material again. But I'm very happy with how this turned out, and I am so excited to continue mending, so let's keep going. Next up is that gorgeous kimono that I thrifted not too long ago. I also showed y'all this in my closet clean out. So this kimono is Cantha Bay. I love the fabric, I love the stitching. Everything about this is so fun and has such a bright, colorful bohemian feel to it. And I'm really excited to do this because I have been really excited to wear it, but just haven't wanted to at the same time because it's not the shape that I like. So my plan for this to make it more wearable in my wardrobe is to add a sleeve to it. It does have this little slit piece at the bottom, and I think that that is the perfect length to take off for me to hem it, but also will be the perfect length for a sleeve and will be kind of a cute touch to make it not so kimono-y and something maybe more dramatic kind of robe, because I do want it to be puffy. So yeah, let's just do this.
Step one for these is always trying the thing on and just seeing where I want to change it up. So I actually really want to take this sleeve up a little bit. I think it'll make the sleeve shape a little more of what I'm looking for with that kind of classic puff. So I'm marking where I want that to hit on my shoulder and then holding up the bottom of the kimono on the inside to see how long I want it to be. But I do have to keep in mind there's a pocket, so I don't want to cut the pocket off too short. So once I figure that out, I'm also marking that with a pin, and we can jump right into cutting off the bottom parts of this kimono. So I love working with patterns like this because I'm actually going to cut right below this little purple band, right in the middle of those yellow arrows, so it gives me a really great straight line to cut on both of the front pieces. I'm then using the front pieces to measure how much I need to cut off of the back, but I want to leave about an inch extra on the back because I do like a little bit of the high-low look to my kimonos like this. I then tossed it on to make sure it was a length that I like, and I'm already loving this shape so much more. So now to cut off the excess sleeves, I am going to be cutting a curve into this because of how I want this puff sleeve to fit. So this is basically just cutting, trying it on, and continuing to cut until I get the shape that I want. So the armholes are done, but I did realize that I wanted to take in the sides from the armpit down to about halfway just because it has a bit of a like tapered in shape and I want it to lay a little straighter. So I'm pinning from an inch up on the armhole down about halfway at an angle until it matches up with the side seam of the kimono. Then folding it in half to match that same angle on the side seam on the other side. Then sewing a straight stitch, cutting off the excess and zigzag stitching it to finish that side seam piece, which means we can move on to our sleeves. So this is the big back piece from that kimono, and I want to cut it in half because I want this blue and yellow piece to be on either sleeve instead of just making an easy tube out of one. So once that's cut in half, I can then place my patterns face to face that I want on the outside of this sleeve. So I'm placing the patterns that I want on the outside face to face, and pay no attention to the video because I actually did it wrong and I had to redo it, but didn't realize that until later. So I wanted this blue and yellow to be face to face with the pink and purple and yellow portion. So just know whatever side that you want to be on the outside needs to be face to face together. So I'm pinning down both sides to make a tube for my sleeve and repeating that same process on the other sleeve, and then doing a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch to finish those side seams, which now gives me these two sleeve tubes. So I need to determine which pieces I want facing where on the final sweater so I can do the arm dip. I also realized that I needed to make the height of my sleeve the same as the height in my armhole because it was about 3 inches too wide. So I just laid the armhole on the sleeve and pinned out what needed to be my new sleeve edge from where the base of the armhole hit the sleeve and just angled it down to match the side seam of my sleeve. I then sewed that, did a zigzag stitch, and ended up with this funky shape, which is now the shape of my sleeve. So I now need to match the angle on my armhole to the angle on my sleeve, and so I'm just cutting that to match, and I can now attach my sleeve. I'm flipping my sleeve right side out and then flipping the bodice portion of this kimono around the outside of that sleeve so they're face to face, but their armhole seams are matching. Once those were placed with their seams matching up, I pinned around the armhole and did a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch to get those sleeves in place. So we can move on to the final step of puffing this sleeve. So we're going to make a little casing for the elastic. I ironed all the inside seams of the sleeves flat to make sure this folded casing lays flat, and then folded up about 1/4 inch on the hem of the sleeve and ironed that flat, and then folded about 1 inch at the bottom of the sleeve, which will make the casing for our elastic. So once that was ironed, I pinned around that whole outside and then sewed a straight stitch to create the casing for the elastic, leaving an opening of about 1 inch so I could scooch my elastic through to make this puff sleeve. With my little elastic tube done, I'm measuring around my wrist for how big I want this circumference to be and adding 1.5 inches of space for seam allowance and for just a little extra for the bulk of the fabric that's going to be puffed. And once I have that cut, I'm using my little safety pin trick to scooch it through the casing that we made on the end of our sleeve. And once it pops out the other side, I am stitching that elastic together and I pull that into place, stitch my little elastic opening down, and this little kimono piece is done.
So good. I did not think that it was going to turn out this good. And I know it's just like not crazy amounts of change, but it's enough change that it's now a shape that I'll wear. It's something that seems interesting and cute to me. And it also has more of that robe feel instead of the like kimono-y kind of oversized feel, and I'm really loving the like mix of patterns. Come on, these little puff sleeves are so cute, and this length is really perfect for me. So I am so inspired, and I hope that you are too. I hope that this encourages you to keep your closet sustainable and just update pieces that you love and fix the things that you need to fix and wear whatever you want to, whenever you want to, and just be so joyful in it. So thank you so much for thrift flipping with me today. I will see you next week. You are well loved. Bye!